Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to Nerd of the Third Power, your one-stop shop for all things nerdy and awesome. I'm your host and master of ceremonies, Dr. Gonzo. With me, as always, this epic quest of awesomeness is our resident anime goddess, the Cat, who's looking a little under the weather this week. Cat, you alive over there?
Yeah, it's a good thing these things are remote. As much as we talk about being in the studio, we do actually record these remotely, and I'm a little bit sick. Just got a little upper respiratory infection, a little ear infection going on, nothing out of the norm, but I'm kind of at the point of being sick where all sounds hurt. So I have everybody really quiet as we record, so if I start to get a little quiet, just let me know, because I'm trying to be soft for my own ears' sake.
You have the T virus.
I have something, all right. And they wouldn't prescribe me any steroids or anything to help get over it, because anything that'll weaken your immune system with COVID-19 going around is considered bad.
Hope you feel better soon. It sounds almost like you need a frame off restoration.
Yeah, don't fucking die.
I'm probably not gonna die. As I am made of sterner stuff than that, but I did sleep all day, which felt amazing. I really have to be up and ready to go tomorrow because I've got a meeting I can't avoid, but yeah, I'm alright. Okay,
all right.
Tired.
And also with us, and a little irritated that we're recording an hour earlier for her, is Skyblaze. So Skyblaze, how you doing this week?
I was fine until you guys called me right in the middle of a Final Fantasy XIV dungeon. You assholes made me miss out on some sweet loot.
Well, blame Benjamin Franklin and his whole daylight savings time thing.
We would get rid of it if we were allowed.
All right, and Mike, how you doing this week?
I am doing A-OK as I once again join you on this podcast of people dying. I'm pretty good though. Otherwise, no real complaints. I'm actually in a fairly decent mood today, so fucking A.
Fucking A.
Nice. Well, we got. I'm doing all right. Kind of still coming down from the high of our last recording session of Fools Who Ride, which we just finished recording the first season this past weekend. So looking forward to getting those put together and put out. And and I've just woken up, so I'm kind of hale and hearty. So we got a fun show for you guys tonight. Tonight we're discussing something that we pretty much everyone except me has some kind of, and that is the rise and fall of conventions. There's this sort of cycle that I've been observing where bigger cons are kind of floundering and smaller ones are becoming really popular. And I've noticed that this has kind of happened before, so thought it'd be something interesting to talk about. But of course, there is procedure to follow, so we're going to begin, as always, with your favorite segment, my favorite segment, our favorite segment, the Ask a Geek. And we got a couple of quick questions here. First question here, this one comes from Juan, and it is addressed to me, although I'm going to open it up to the floor. And the question is, what do I think of Reggie Fils-Aimé, I always mispronounce that, joining the board of directors of GameStop? And for me, if this had happened a couple years ago, I'd have said if anybody could have steered GameStop onto a better course, it would have been Reggie. But I think at this point, the writing's on the wall. I don't think there's anything that can be done to really save GameStop. I think they've really burned too many bridges with their customer base, and I don't see anything being able to survive, to help them survive at this point. So, Mike, what about you? What do you think of this?
Well, called this a year ago. Me and Alex did a prototype on this, and we're like, don't be surprised if GameStop does pull in Reggie at some point. And you're right. They've done a lot in the public eye to dissuade customers from staying loyal. They sell more merch as opposed to actual video games. Things have changed a lot on the retail storefront. And when you can go to Amazon and get stuff, you can go to Walmart, you can go to Target, you can go to any big box retailer or have it delivered straight to your door. The need for GameStops is going away. I remember when you used to go there and get midnight launches, really cool pre-order bonuses, and there's less incentive. So can Reggie turn the ship around? Maybe, but it's only if the board of directors is willing to listen to him and put in action his ideas. The idea of turning GameStop into a gaming center and putting them into the competitive arena of esports is a foolhardy and frankly fucking stupid idea. Hopefully Reggie will scrap those ideas and be like, okay guys, we need to get people in stores. How are we going to do that? So I don't know, man. I think I think you're right, though. The writing is on the wall, especially with this next generation of consoles coming around. Maybe this can buy them some time. But if GameStop was a cat, its 9 lives are quickly running out.
I'm going to agree to disagree with you on the idea of turning GameStops into sort of land centers and social spaces for gaming. I think that would actually be a really good idea, because at least in where I'm at in the Annapolis, Baltimore area, there used to be a bunch of land gaming centers, and then they all closed down. So there's a local Overwatch scene that has been looking for a place to, kind of do its thing. And I think, if GameStop were to tap into that, they can actually turn that into a decent revenue stream. So I'm going to have to agree to disagree with you on that. But I mean, like I already said, at this point, it's too little too late as far as I'm concerned. Skyblaze, I don't know if you have GameStop over there in the UK, but what do you think of this development?
We don't have GameStop. We used to have a place called Game Station, and we currently have something called Game, which is just game in big block letters. And that went through a very similar thing to GameStop a few years ago. There's very, very few stores actually left now. The game stores that are left are mostly selling kind of gaming merchandise rather than as well as games themselves, but the merchandise seems to be more of the central focus, if you like. One of the reasons why I think I can't speak to GameStop because I've never been in one, but for Game, going back quite several years, like a decade and a half at least, the reason people would go into Game is because the staff were really, really well trained and would be able to advise you on hardware, the games you might like, the types of things you'd be into. They had a really good range of peripherals, which were reasonably priced. And then they started cutting costs, and the cost of the peripherals went up so that you could get them for a much, much cheaper on Amazon. At one point, they were selling an optical cable for like 25 quid. An optical sound cable for a PS3, and I was like, nope, not paying that. And the staff were, a lot of them were kind of temporary staff, or they were really poorly trained and had no idea what they were talking about. They were just there to sell the games that they were told to sell.
Yeah, sounds like what GameStop's been doing for the last 10 years or so. And then he's got a follow-up question here, which is, why am I not as vitriolic towards GameStop as I used to be? And the answer is, I just don't care anymore. I mean, I stopped giving a shit about GameStop once I discovered Amazon Prime, and the fact that I can have these games delivered to my house, which for someone who doesn't like dealing with people on his good days is a godsend. And another thing that I like about Amazon over GameStop is with Amazon, I don't have to turn over 1 red cent until the item is ready to ship. I've lost count of the number of times I've heard stories of people dropping money down to GameStop for pre-order and then going in and hearing, "Oh no, we didn't get the game," and you're just SOL. So, if Amazon doesn't get what I order, I don't have to pay anything. So, that's why I just don't give a shit about GameStop anymore. That, and really, what else can I say about GameStop that hasn't been said before? I mean, it's like talking about Super Mario Brothers or Jaws. What new can be added to the discourse? So that's that. Let's see here now. Okay, here's a question for you, Skyblaze. Although I'm also going to open up to the floor here for those who've been following it. And the question comes from Lacey, and she asks, "What did you think of the Doctor Who Series 12 finale?"
I've only watched half of it so far because I actually had a migraine when I was trying to watch it. And by halfway through, the pain was so bad that I could no longer see the screen. What I did see of it was very, very interesting. There's a lot of implications for the greater lore surrounding Doctor Who, and fan theories are already buzzing all over the internet, and our fan discussion is gone completely bonkers. There's been the standard fanboy wails of, but that's not what it was originally, they've retconned it, blah blah blah. Meh. I still thought it was interesting. I'm trying not to be spoilerific about this because a lot of people have not seen it yet, and as I say, I've only seen about half to 3/4 of it. I possibly will revisit this when I have actually watched all of it, when I am less ill. But yeah, it was very, very interesting. I've been enjoying Jodie Whittaker's run actually. Not only because I'm biased, because a lot of the episodes are set in Sheffield, but a bit.
Okay, all right. Well, I haven't seen any of season 12. I think the last episode of Doctor Who I watched was in Capaldi's run. It was the one where Davros was dying, and I kind of fell off of it after that. So I've got a lot of catching up to do. I have read about what happened in the finale, and I'm kind of leery about it. But that's also because I just don't like whole lore-wide retcons in general. So, but you know, I don't know. Maybe I'll think differently of it once I catch up and see it actually in execution. So, Mike, you're about to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I've only read about what happens, and I think this could be actually kind of neat for what it means for the wider lore and continuity of Doctor Who. I like when people take bold chances as long as they pay off properly. So, all right, this is kind of neat. I enjoy Whittaker from what I've seen. I like the idea of them using the Cybermen because I really enjoy those bad guys. Yeah, I mean, overall, I've been pretty impressed. Like I said, with what I've seen, I've only seen 1 or 2 full episodes with her, but reading what's happened over the course of the series, that's pretty cool. So I'm doing a full watch of Doctor Who this year with my wife, starting all the way back with Christopher Eccleston. We're going to go all the way to now. So that'll be a fun couple months.
So if you were going to do a full watch, you'd have a bit of a problem.
Yeah, it's going to take me until 2029 at the earliest. But yeah, I'm pretty excited for what this could open up. I mean, one of the things that I do is I read the Doctor Who role-playing game from Cubicle 7, and I'm excited to see how they introduce this mechanic into the game later on. So I'm excited for weird reasons.
Okay. And with that, that's all the Ask the Geek questions that we have for this week. As always, you can send them to us through the email at drgonzo@nerdwiththethirdpower.com. We love getting your questions, love reading them on the air, so go ahead and get your questions in. And so with that, we're going to jump right into the meat and potatoes of this episode. And so here's what kind of gave me the idea for this discussion. So I don't make it to a whole lot of cons because I work weekends and, you know, it's hard for me to get that time off. But I've got a bunch of friends who they make the East Coast con circuit. They hit, you know, Awesome Con, Katsucon, Otakon, you know, Baltimore City Comic Con, New York Comic Con, all the, you know, bunch of the major ones. And I've kind of noticed this sort of pattern in all my friends I talk to who make the con circuit, that they're becoming less and less happy with the larger cons like Otakon and Comic-Con, and they're having, you know, they're having a much more enjoyable time at some of the smaller, more local cons like Awesome Con. And you know, it's kind of an interesting thing to me because I remember this cycle, hearing a lot of the same talk on similar lines, you know, 10 years ago in the 2000s. And I'm kind of seeing this cycle again where these smaller cons, you know, some of the big cons I'm hearing people talk about that they're not happy with anymore. I remember being small cons back in the 2000s and everybody was kind of like all real jazzed about them. So this is something I kind of wanted to kind of get your guys' insight on because all three of you have a lot of experience with the con circuit, Cat and Skyblaze especially. And so I just kind of want to get your thoughts on this cycle. Am I seeing kind of a tinfoil hat thing, or is this something that actually happens in the convention circuit?
So this is not a tinfoil hat thing. This is a real thing. Now I'm gonna speak from experience for a lot of different angles of conventions because science fiction conventions are different than comic conventions, are different than anime conventions, are different than like MagFest, more media-centric conventions. Every different convention is going to have a different audience base. It's going to have a different age of that audience, and there's a lot of competition among the different kinds of conventions. So there's a lot of factors that go into why conventions exist and who goes to them and how enjoyable they are. So it's a lot of apples and oranges when it comes to cons. You can't really compare a sci-fi con to an anime con because they're run by different people for different people. But there is a thing where I think smaller conventions are more fun than larger conventions, and we could talk about why. So, for context, I lived in Baltimore and grew up going to Otakon. Basically, grew up going to Otakon as a teenager, and Otakon is one of the largest anime conventions in the country. It's huge. It's only gotten huger, and then it sort of dipped for a while, and it has never really recovered the numbers that it had previously. And then I moved out to the Midwest and discovered the joy of smaller conventions. Now, when you say small conventions, there's like no scale or anything that I'm aware of that determines what a smaller con is. My scale is sort of like a small convention to me is like less than 3,000, and a medium convention is like 3 to 10, and then anything above 10 is just a monster and I don't want any part of it. And I've been working a small convention that has grown into a medium convention for the last 12 years straight. So my insight is very much from the showrunner side rather than an attendee side at this point, because I haven't actually attended a convention for fun in a long time, with the exception of like the local Wizard World convention, which again is a very different kind of convention. When I came out here and discovered the joys of small conventions, it was a huge shift from the big cons. To me, feel very impersonal. They are hectic. There's like a manic energy that happens at them. There's a lot of shifting towards them being more commercial. They're just giant money machines, whereas smaller cons are more intimate. You can get closer to people. You can get closer to the people you're there to see. There's obviously not as much going on. There's not as much programming or guests or whatever available. But to me, it just is a lot more fun because it's not quite so crazy all the time. What do you guys think?
The scale of conventions in the UK tends to be a bit different. A small scale con in the UK can go right the way down to 500 people or 500 attendees or less. I help run one that's about that sort of scale, a little bit bigger, called Redemption. And the type of con that you tend to get can be roughly divided into two very vague categories. And there is some overlap, but not a lot. The first one is what I'm going to refer to as the MCM style convention. For those who don't know, MCM Comic Con or MCM Expo is a big series of conventions that run in enormous convention centres, places like the Excel Centre in London, and have an attendance in excess of 100,000 people over the course of 4 days.
Good Lord. Can you even fit that many people in one building?
In the Excel Centre, yes, you can. They are terrifyingly enormous, but they are largely commercial enterprises. They are there to sell merchandise. They are there to promote upcoming games, movies, TV shows. Corporations and companies like Ubisoft and EA and Sony and the big film studios will all have massive booths there to promote whatever film that is coming up. Usually it's genre related, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, that sort of thing. And there's also a big stage where celebrity guests will come. There's a lot of emphasis on getting autographs, but a lot of the kind of fan interaction, the thing that I find is what makes the convention a convention, is done by the attendees kind of independently from the organization of the con itself, if that makes sense. people will gather to have meetups of fan groups and do photo shoots and things like that, completely without the interference of the convention organizer. On the other side, you've got the ones that are not commercial, usually not for profit. All of the money that potentially gets made goes to charity. That's the sort of thing that I run with Redemption. Is largely what EasterCon does. There's no sponsorship. There's no real commercial involvement, and the emphasis is on the fans creating their own content. Things like Redemption and EasterCon, you'll go to a panel discussion or a workshop, and it's not done by a celebrity guest. It's done by a member of the fan community who wants to talk about a thing or show you a thing. And these are the two types you get. An EasterCon is considered huge if it gets 2,000 people. Part of the problem with the con scene in the UK is unless you're doing something like the MCMs where you have a big convention centre, there aren't enough hotels in the UK with a big enough capacity to take more than, say, 1,000 people. So that's a bit of a problem. And the UK is obviously a smaller place than the US, but it's a bit of a different scene. One thing that does occasionally happen, and I've seen it happen repeatedly in repeated cycles. I went to my first convention when I was 16 in 1999. And something I've seen since then is that the tiny cons will get bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where either they are no longer commercially viable, as in the organizers have to put out so much money that the amount that they're bringing in through ticket sales is not enough to sustain the con without putting the prices up beyond what most people will be willing to pay. The other thing that happens is that they then start inviting in commercial sponsorship, and that quite often ruins the flavor of the convention, and it becomes another corporate event rather than a fan-run event.
It's interesting to me because what you're describing, the MCM, is basically like San Diego Comic-Con. It's the big Comic-Con events. We have like Wizard World here. That's very much the same thing. It's less of a convention and more of a big vendor hall with celebrities. That you spend thousands to get autographs. I have spent thousands to get autographs. It's so ridiculous. And to me, it's just so impersonal, but I still go because I really, really want to meet this or that celebrity. But then it just seems like we have here in the US just a lot more space to have conventions. And if you don't know how prolific the convention scene is because you haven't been to one or haven't looked at it, there is an anime convention for every weekend of the year for Infinity. There's probably 2 to 3 cons a weekend, every weekend. It's absolutely insane. Every major city has at least one, if not more. And by major city, I mean I worked in the Tokyo and Tulsa convention for years. Tulsa barely qualifies as a city, y'all. It's not very big. So like even St. Louis has multiple conventions here and multiple anime conventions, much less the competition with the horror convention, the sci-fi convention, Wizard World, and a couple of other smaller comic conventions. It's really obscene. I think it's part of why, well, I guess we could go into why the bigger cons aren't, the bigger cons are getting less popular is kind of the proposal of this podcast. And part of it is the unsustainability of a large convention.
Unless you've got some real money backing you and your con is well organized, it's going to fall apart quickly. Like, you need good people heading things up.
Right, and it was really evident in Wizard World, because they are a touring show, that they spent too much money too quickly, they bridged out too fast, and all of their shows, with the exception of like the big ones in like Philadelphia, Chicago, and maybe
LA has one, doesn't it?
I'm not sure if they have one because of the competition with SDCC.
Stan Lee's or whatever.
Yeah, but the big ones I know of are Philadelphia and Chicago, which are major urban areas, obviously. On the whole, their entire show set diminished, even though they continued to expand out into smaller and smaller cities. They like the whole production value of every single convention went down. And you can tell that by their guest lineup and just the whole thing just it crashed real hard. And part of it was because they tried to expand into China.
Oh dear.
And I can't even imagine what the logistics of that and the cost of that is like, because you're no longer flying all of your guests in from LA, which is already a nightmare. You're flying them to another country, which is a whole nother set of complications and costs to add in. So what's interesting to me is that big shows like that are starting to diminish, but it's mostly their own fault, I feel. And it's less about the fans, because the big Comic-Con style appeal to a wider audience. You have, the normies. I'm just going to put it out there, the normies. The normies will flock to a convention if they can see Jason Momoa in person. Whereas, a hardcore, like, anime fan might skip a big comic book convention because they just don't have the money for it. Whereas, a whole swath of normies might go just to see one celebrity because it's their only opportunity. So I feel like that's part of it, is that the big conventions, the big mega shows are actually pricing themselves out of the range of the hardcore fans because there's so much competition. And if that big show is just a money-making machine and so impersonal and doesn't really pander specifically to the nerd, it's pandering to a wider audience, then the uber nerd who might want to go there to meet their favorite comic book author is just getting pushed to the side. And they might just say, screw it, I'm not going to that. They don't care about me. And if you pay attention to any discourse about the big comic book conventions, all artists and comic book sellers generally are unhappy with the state of things because these conventions don't care about them despite calling themselves comic book conventions. These things have become all about celebrities and autographs and spending all of your money before you even get to where the artists are.
Well, yeah, because like my experience with this, and I'll just kind of go over it quickly so we can get back to the discussion. I come from the convention planning and consultation. I've consulted with several small to large conventions here in Ontario, and I did that in the early part of the decade. I've been attending conventions since I was probably about 16, 17 years old. My first one being Anime North in just north of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The largest convention I've ever done is Fan Expo and PAX East for several successive years, and I've covered them as media as well. But like you were talking about, you price yourselves out because you don't know, like, because you want to get really, really, really good guests, but unless you bring in a different variety of guests every year, I find a lot of recycling. And one of the conventions I used to consult with, I'm not going to name them here, pretty much invited the same guest lineup every year for like 2-3 years in a row. And this is at the height of the YouTuber popularity thing. And it worked for a certain subsection of fans. It brought in a lot of people because conventions were bringing in a lot of those types of people. Like, this is when things were super, super hot around the mid part of this decade or last decade. And as time has worn forward and things have moved on, they're getting less and less good, or not good's not the proper term, but less interesting people. I mean, this convention at its height had Markiplier, who's a fantastically huge YouTuber, does some good work. I'm not a fan, whatever, but that's a pretty big get. But you want to branch out and get some of these other celebrities, as you were mentioning. Some of their starting fees are like $5,000-$6,000. And then as you mentioned, you have to worry about getting their flights. Here in Canada, for the conventions I've worked with, we'd fly them into Buffalo. So that involves from Toronto or wherever this convention was. So we'd have to cross the border, get them across the border, explain to the border guards what we're doing. And then we'd have to get either an airport shuttle or someone to go get them and deal with that whole hassle. There was paperwork because it is an international event. There are work visas technically. And there's a bunch of little technicalities you don't think about. Or if these people bring merch up, they have to declare what they're bringing up. So it's confusing and annoying. And you're right. With like some of these larger conventions, it eventually becomes all about the money. And as you say, appealing to the normies. Like you're going to want to go to see your Jason Momoas, your William Shatners. And I guess you could say you're like maybe some of the bigger anime people like Chris Sabat and Sean Schemmel. Or, you know, even like some of the kind of lesser known kind of voice actors will attract to some of the small conventions, which is great because you're appealing to that. But things have changed a lot in my experience over the years. Some of the bigger conventions like Toronto Fan Expo, for example, is in my opinion, and just like Skyblaze and you have said, they're just big vendor halls that happen to have celebrities. It's basically a nerd flea market with overpriced shit. Occasionally you'll find some really good stuff. You'll find some really good deals, but it's a vendor hall. There might be some cool panels, maybe. Whereas a smaller fan-run convention, which doesn't have a lot of corporate money behind it, maybe some, does have really good panels driven by fan content every year. Like that's where I think MagFest excelled. I haven't been since 2013, so I really can't tell you if it's like that anymore. Like the fans would drive a lot of the really cool content and some of the cool content creators. And then some of the other things like PAX East, the developers will come out and do panels, which are really interesting and fun. Plus, they also have something for you to do. Like, there's always like the jam space, which is like where bands can play and do whatever. Or if you happen to be a musician who knows how to play a guitar, you can just jump up on stage and play. MagFest did that too to great success. That's where I used to hang out mostly during these conventions, was during the music halls. But anyway, I forget where I was going with this. So, Kat, pick up the ball and run with it.
Actually, I kind of like to because I fully admit that I'm a normer with this, but there's I've kind of observed the cycle kind of in miniature in the gaming side of things. So anyone who's followed me on Facebook probably knows and is very annoyed by the fact that I'm a huge Penny Arcade fan and continuously post Penny Arcade comics. Well, the guys who run Penny Arcade are the guys who started PAX, and I remember when that grew out of the little fan meets, the NecroWambaCon. It became the first Penny Arcade Expo, and it was very much just a small gaming convention. It was just it was a much more social scene. You know, people, LAN parties, tournaments, that kind of thing. You didn't get a whole lot of interest from the developers. And then I want to say maybe around like 2007, 2008, you started to see the developers and publishers trying to take it interested and start doing their reveals and showing trailers at PAX. And now PAX has grown not only to a multi-location convention. You've got locations in Seattle and Baltimore, Australia, but in terms of the general presentation feel, it's almost become kind of a mini E3. And meanwhile, you've got E3 itself, which developers and publishers have been kind of threatening to back out of it for a long time now. Sony's already skipped last year, and I believe they said they were going to skip this year. Nintendo has I don't think had a real much of a floor presence for the last couple of years, focusing mainly on their directs. So, I've kind of observed this cycle kind of in the gaming scene, and is that kind of similar to what we were discussing with kind of the corporatization of cons with what's happened with PAX?
I would say no, because E3 is just it's an event. It is less a convention and more of an announcement machine.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long it's been that way because I have never really paid that much attention.
Always.
If that's all it's ever been, then it has not changed that much. And really, it's people's attitude towards E3 is what's changing. And that could be totally wrong, but it just does seem like it's one of those things where there's just the expectations for E3 are just insane. You know, whereas the growth of PAX seems very natural. But what's happening with a lot of cons, and I'll kind of talk about this angle from the anime con perspective. Anime cons don't have the same corporatization problem as the big comic book conventions because anime is still really niche by comparison. It is still a thing where normal people and generic nerds do not really go in for the anime cons as much as an anime nerd who likes mostly just anime would go in for a comic book convention. The problem with when the anime cons get too big is that they can no longer sustain their activities without additional funding. Without raising the prices or finding new facilities, because it's really easy to outgrow space. It is really hard to find a place that can fit an anime convention that isn't heinously overpriced. And this is something that my own show will end up needing to deal with here in the next few years as we outgrow our current convention center. So this is speaking from true experience, that once your convention gets so big, it becomes a monstrosity to run. It is a nightmare because you have so many people. If your convention has 10,000 people and all 10,000 of them want to do, let's say, the Masquerade or a concert, because this is a real thing that Otakon would do. If 10,000 people attend a convention, 10,000 of them want to go to a concert because you've brought in this cool Japanese guest, and that concert can only seat 4,000 people, you have to figure out how to either make that available for everybody somehow or ensure that you don't violate any fire codes and so sad everybody else, you know? So a lot of conventions have had to implement ticketing systems, which I think it's not a new thing, but it is 100% becoming more common, wherein if there is a specific, autograph sessions are now requiring tickets, and it's not like you pay more for the tickets, it's just a way of making the process fair.
For example, sorry if I may, as an example, your pass may have a number on it, and it's like, you're number 55, and on Tuesday between 10 and 1, numbers 1 to 200 can go. And the next day, numbers 201 to 500 can attend.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of conventions are implementing systems like that, or literally you go up and you pick up a ticket in the morning, and during the autograph session you hand over your ticket. Whatever it takes to make that process as fair as possible. And everyone hates it. It is non-stop complaints. Nobody likes it, but conventions need them after they get to a certain point. So there's a lot of complaints going around about ticketing systems, and big conventions like Anime Expo, which is the biggest anime convention in the country, have had to implement doing the thing that nobody wants to experience, which is charging additional costs for specific events. And this is where the fans start to lose interest. And this is a thing that I believe Otakon started doing that made people super lose interest, which is if you want to get into the Masquerade, it's an extra $10 or $20. If you want to get into this panel, it's an extra whatever.
Fuck that!
Oh, I know. Oh, I know. But it's because
Otakon's already really expensive. I had a friend, a friend of mine who goes every year. He told me how much it cost him to just get his ticket last year, and I damn near passed a kidney stone.
Right, and that's because Otakon got big. It got really, really big, and they had no choice but to raise the prices in order to rent out more space. So this is what really caused Otakon to suffer, was having to raise their weekend prices so that like your starting price was like $75 or something like that. Where as a small con, your ticket at the door might be $35 for the weekend, and a medium con might be $45 or $55. But if your starting price, like your pre-reg price, the lowest cost is going to be like $75 or $80, you've already priced yourself out of a lot of fans.
I mean, there better be some damn wow factor for $75.
Right. So AX has had to fall into the idea of charging additional prices for certain extra events, and I don't know how much Otakon ended up doing this, but Otakon got so big that they could no longer have any of their main events inside the Baltimore Convention Center. They would have to.
They actually had to move out of the Baltimore Convention Center. They're now holding it in the National Harbor outside DC. And I remember when that happened, it made headline news in Baltimore. Like, I was hearing them talking about this on the 98 Rock Morning Show, because that was, for those who don't know the Baltimore Convention Center, it's like right smack dab in the middle of one of Baltimore's main restaurant and hotel zones. So there's a bunch of small businesses and restaurants and dineries and eateries that would rely on business from Otakon attendees. And when Otakon pulled out of Baltimore, I mean, the fucking mayor had to make a statement about it.
Yeah.
So that gives you an idea of how big it had gotten.
Before they ended up moving, they were doing stuff like having all of their main events in the First Mariner Arena, because they could no longer house even one main event in a normal convention space. And that's where you start to get really iffy with the size of your convention. If
There's
you
also
can-
there's a problem with how do you police that many people?
Well, that comes down to your volunteers and also you working with your city or the convention center to provide security, which is additional cost, but you also incur liability as well, because your volunteers can only handle so much before the police or security staff have to kind of step in. So that's one of the problems we dealt with at one of the conventions I was working with. We grew out of a hotel that held quite a number of people. We went to a convention center, and then things got exponentially bigger from there.
A good convention will have a well-trained security team, but almost all conventions nowadays that I work for or with or know of require like the convention center or facility that you're in requires you to have their security team doing like door checks and that sort of thing. And also after certain hours, you need to have like an armed police there.
What?
We have, I believe, one or two like cops that come at night because we have raves and stuff.
Yeah, we have late night parties as well. I've DJ'd for stuff that's gone on till 3 a.m., but we still don't have actual police on site, certainly not armed ones.
Yeah.
What the hell, America?
Well, okay, so there's also
And Canada too.
Oh, good grief.
And this has gotten more prevalent in the last few years, but there have been threats against conventions. This is completely off the topic, but still within the realm. Multiple threats have been made against conventions where people say they're going to go shoot up a con. Not any con that I work or anything like that. But
you think how easy it would be to sneak in any kind of a weapon.
It's not that easy.
Really?
Well, every anime convention at the bare minimum has okay, this is just
They'll check you at the door, won't they?
Yes.
Yeah, the
I know,
orange tape thing.
MCM will do weapons checks and bag checks.
Yeah.
But that's just the XL Center security staff. It's not actual police.
Right.
Yeah, and that's been that way since 9/11. That's across the board. That's any kind of major event. You can't even go to an Orioles game without having to get pat down and get a bag check.
Right. So any convention worth its salt and adhering to almost every hotel or convention center's requirements. Almost every convention requires a bag check. You're not allowed to bring in outside food or drink almost anywhere. And there is a weapons check to make sure that what you're bringing in is not a live weapon of any kind. There are no conventions that I'm aware of that allow you to have unbonded live steel or a firearm. If you have a thing that looks like a firearm, you have to get a orange cap on the front.
Mhm.
And any weapon that, if you do have, like, if you're going to a convention where you can buy live steel, it has to be peace bonded.
Yep.
At the very least, or taken to your hotel room or car. Like, weapon checks are as soon as you walk in the door. And how they're doing this is by limiting the number of open entrances. So this has been a huge thing that I've seen at conventions over the last few years, is they are locking more and more doors so that you can get out as much as you need, but you can only get in through a few places, and they have security at those doors to make sure that you do not try and sneak someone in. So in order to get in, you have to go through security, go through a bag check, and if you have anything that looks like a weapon, they will send you to a weapons check. So
I think part of the cultural difference here is that a lot of conventions in the UK are held in hotels, not at convention centres. I mean, there's some that are held at arenas and places like the Excel Centre, but the smaller cons are usually at hotels.
Yeah, that really is a total dependent on how big the hotel is, how big your convention is, because a lot of like anime cons start in hotels and then quickly outgrow them. And it's really interesting to me because there is a lot of rhyme and reason that goes into why a convention gets bigger, or why it, like we've been talking about why conventions don't succeed, like the big ones are getting less popular, but that conversely means the small ones are getting more popular. And part of it is the proliferation of conventions. Every city has its own convention. Even a lot of like smaller towns have their own conventions. So they're everywhere, and a lot of them are just like they're like startup shows that don't succeed because the people who run it don't either have the funds to run it correctly, or they don't know how to run it correctly. So there's new cons cropping up all the time, but those ones that manage to stick with it and make it past the first really rough years are doing really, really well for themselves. And part of it is because the big cons, the big cons, are a pain in the ass to get to. They are in big cities that you've either got to drive or fly to. The parking is shit. You've got to pay for parking. The cost of the ticket is outrageous.
Hotels.
And you end up you blow all of your money in the first hour, and you got to pay $6 for a bottle of water. Why go through all of that when I can go to my local hometown convention and pay significantly less for everything? Like, God forbid you go to a convention you don't need to stay at a hotel for. So I really feel like these medium-sized conventions, like my own convention, have just been doing decently well simply because it's closer than Chicago, or it's closer than Kansas City, stuff like that. We're not too big that people are intimidated to go. Like anime cons, I don't know how many times I've been told that my convention was someone's first convention. And so this is the big breakdown in demographics here, y'all. Anime conventions attract a much younger crowd than a sci-fi convention. We have this perfect sphere in St. Louis with Anime St. Louis, with Wizard World St. Louis, and with Archon, which is spelled with the arch in it, which is the big, very, very old established sci-fi convention here. The sci-fi convention crowd, the people who run it are all generally older, and the people who attend it are all generally older, and they sort of reach out to other groups and go, hey, we know you guys run an anime convention. Give us the name of a person who does stuff with anime so we can invite them as a guest.
There's
So-
another thing I wanted to comment on is there's a tipping point with when a convention gets to a certain size. Because remember that for the most part, conventions are organized by volunteers. And these people usually have jobs and lives, and sometimes they have children and spouses and other obligations. And this has to be borne in mind when you are part of a group who's organizing a convention, that these people are not being paid. These people are doing it out of the love of the event and the love of whatever the theme is of what they are doing. Sci-fi, fantasy, anime, video games, whatever it is. But as the convention gets bigger and the amount of work that is required to run this thing grows, there is a point past which you cannot justify asking people to do that much work without paying them.
Yes.
And at that and at that point, either you invite corporate sponsorship or you start doing it for profit. At which point, the attitude of the con changes.
Yeah, that's totally true. The conventions I were involved with as a consultant, I was paid very reasonable for my services, and I was retained for several months to consult on demographics, guests, and basically how to handle the social media and public relations and marketing strategy for several of these conventions. And I would say I've been pretty successful. They were very happy with my performance over the years that I was involved with them. And yeah, over a certain time, these like volunteers do wonderful work, and some of them will work for the conventions for next to nothing or peanuts. But sometimes you got to bring in professionals who know what they're doing. So you kind of got to measure it. And this is something that I didn't really mention. And medium conventions are fun. Now, one thing I didn't mention is I've been invited to conventions as a guest. I've been involved in a couple of small ones and a couple of medium ones as a guest. And sometimes the medium ones are the best. And I say that because you can get more FaceTime with fans and people who are within your community spaces. And you also have a better communication with the con organizers as well. Because if you have a problem, people will help. Like I had a person who was helping me as a guest who was my quote unquote runner. Every time I needed something, I hate to use this phrase, but if I snapped my fingers, I could get something. That was friggin' great and made things so much easier. And every other guest who was there worked really well. I mean, this convention, when it was at its height, worked like a well-oiled machine. And everybody who was at that convention had such a good time. Even things like opening and closing ceremonies, in my experience, aren't traditionally well attended. These were really well attended. That really surprised me. Just to see that level of involvement from a community. And as the conventions grow from, as Kat said, from very small, rough year conventions, as they grow and gain a reputation, you start to develop kind of regulars. You start to develop trust within those communities, and community partners will even step forward. So when these conventions start to run for profit, you'll see occasionally, like maybe a food truck will say, hey, let's work with the city, let's work something out. Or other corporate sponsors like comic book stores or radio stations will start to get involved. And things change for the better, at least in my experience, with a lot of these conventions.
One thing that I do want to bring up, since you're talking about corporate sponsorship, is that for a smaller medium convention, corporate sponsorship is really hard to get. This is this is a secret that I'm going to let you all in on. It's really difficult because as long as the big shows like Comic-Con are around, unless you have made a proven impact in your area, corporations do not care about you. They don't want to support you because you're not Comic-Con.
Yep, that's true.
Our experience since Wizard World came around is that people who normally might, throw a little bit of sponsorship our way are now saying that, well, we only have so much money to give and we want to do it at Wizard World because it's a much, much bigger show and a much wider audience than ours. Because as I said, anime cons It's a lot of teenagers attending it. It's a majority teenagers attending it. So disposable income is a little bit hit and miss. You can't, you know, like a bank might not sponsor us because, why would they? It's not like a bunch of 16-year-olds are gonna go out there and be like, I need to get up a bank account set up with this company because they sponsored the show, blah, blah, blah. We're not their market, basically. So getting that corporate sponsorship is really tough. It's really, really tough. You have to really search really hard for the right kind of company to go to. And even then, there's so much competition with all these different conventions cropping up that's nearly impossible to find anyone who's willing to actually shell out money. Nobody wants to shell out money. Let me just put that out there. Everybody wants to say, well, give us a table and we'll give you something to give away as a prize for some contest. Nobody wants to actually help you pay for stuff.
No, yeah, exactly. You're right. They'll give you stuff, but money, in my experience too, good friggin' luck.
Yeah, it's really, really tough because what we struggle with the most as a convention is paying for stuff up front. Paying for flights, for the actual hotel space. There's a lot of money getting poured into these things. It's more than you'd think. And we always were looking for somebody who's like, maybe or bags or something, just anything we can get. And it's really, really hard. And the best thing that you can do as a convention is have a good rapport with your city. It's like Otakon. Otakon was such good money for the city of Baltimore because of the increase in tourism and the restaurants and everything. The people of Baltimore, like the restaurants and the shops and stuff, made bank when Otakon was around. Like Gonzo said, to the extent of when it moved, it made headlines. And so the big thing is like, have a good rapport with your city or your county or wherever you're at. And they might at least help you out because they have the understanding of how much money you're bringing into town. It's one of the things that with Anime St. Louis, it took us a while, but our convention area, the town that we're in, they love it. They're one of our few hardcore sponsors who has always got our back for us and everything. It's just really hard to find a close relationship, but once you've got it, keep it. And don't let yourself get taken advantage of. It has to be an equivalent exchange. Otherwise, you're just losing money. And that goes both ways.
One of the things I think we should maybe talk about is, let's say some of our listeners want to do a convention this summer or this fall. How do we decide what's best for them to spend, say, their first con experience? This is the one that they're willing to travel to, or that's local to them. They want to spend money. They want to have fun. How do we decide that for them? Or what's the best advice we can all give from our collective experience?
Don't buy anything on the first day.
Yes, wait till Sunday.
One of my favorite Penny Arcade strips, going back to that, is Tycho takes his niece to Comic-Con and says, don't buy anything on the first day, but on Sunday, they will pay you to haul their dreams away. Sunday, child, Sunday, then you can sift the ruins of Empire.
It's not as true as it used to be. I genuinely have never, in the last, 10 years, have never really scoped out a Sunday sale that made me go, oh my God. There's just nothing. The sales on Sunday are not what they used to be, in my opinion. But also the types of vendors that you see now are not what they used to be 10 years ago. There's a lot more variety, and that variety is really interesting. But anyway, what type of convention should we send a hypothetical person to? All depends on that hypothetical person's interests. If they like anime, I would send them to their local anime convention. Even if it means not traveling, you can still get the experience of, if you can afford to stay in a hotel for the duration of an anime con, even if it's local, I do recommend it because you get a very different experience than if you just show up and struggle to find a place to park. It's a lot more fun. You can do stuff like room parties, and you're not as stressed out with late night programming that might run till like 3 in the morning. And then you're already on site for like some of the earlier programming. Plus, if the hotel has free breakfast, then hey, that's cool. I always recommend your local one. Your local one. Support your local people. If you're a huge nerd and you have a bunch of friends who are nerds, chances are you probably know somebody on staff. See if you can get a little hookup. You know what I'm saying?
She's not wrong, guys.
But yeah, always.
For the UK, it's very stratified into the sort of things you're into. I mean, there's specific conventions for literary sci-fi, there's conventions for video games, there's conventions for various different TV programs. There's like Game of Thrones cons and conventions about vampires, and there's role-playing conventions, and there's all sorts of other stuff. So pick what interests you most. If you can go with friends, please go with friends. If you can't and you're there by yourself, don't be afraid to talk to people, because the people there are there for the same reasons you are. So speak up, say hi, I like your costume, or that's a great t-shirt, or whatever it is. Be polite. Don't pester people if they don't want to talk to you. But try and strike up friendships. It'll be worth it, trust me.
Yeah, I can second this. There's actually, I've got 2 really short stories for that. So I went to PAX East for the first time in 2010, and the person I was going with wanted to do things I didn't want to do, so I wandered around by myself, and I got recognized a few times, but I'm like, cool, I'm just going to play it cool. I'm here to have fun. I'm not working this weekend. And one guy I met in line, and we just started talking, and he was filming something, and we've kept in touch over the last 10 years. I'm still friends with him on Facebook. His name's Jason, and he's a pretty good dude, and I always enjoy his Facebook posts, and we don't talk much, but we interact. Another time, again at PAX, first year I was running in Boston, I was bored and lonely. I found a place to have a nap in a beanbag chair, and this was near the end of like Saturday, and I'm thinking, all right, I want something to do. And there was a board game demo area, and I sat down and I saw them playing this board game. And I'm thinking, well, I want something to do. I'm like, hi guys, can I join you? They're like, yeah, sure, come on, sit down. And they showed me how to play Last Night on Earth, which quickly became one of my favorite board games of the last 10 years. And it's fantastically fun. And I never got their names. I always felt really bad about that, but I had a really fantastic experience with that. And then one of the sweetest things that ever happened to me was, again, at PAX. I didn't have a lot of money with me the first year that I went, because I decided to go on a whim. I had like next to nothing in my bank account. I didn't have any cash on me. By the way, conventions, cash is king. Don't count on debit machines or credit cards. Cash, people love it. Anyway, I'm sitting outside the concert hall waiting for Video Game Orchestra and the Proto Men to play, and I'm really hungry. And I forget what I said to somebody, but these 2 girls stopped a trolley for me and bought me a sandwich. They didn't know who I was. They just knew that I was just a guy who was hungry. And they were willing to step out of their comfort zone and mine. And I gave them a big handshake, gave them a big hug, thanked them for their time and their kindness. And you'd be surprised. People can be really nice at these conventions. Like, you always hear the horror stories of people just hang out in cliques. They're there with your friends. And like Skyblaze just said, you can meet new people, and you'd be very, very surprised at the cool people that are there. Because some of these people, it might be their first convention, could be their 10th convention or whatever. You're there for the same reason. You all want to have fun. You all want to have a shared experience. You're not going to run into Chad the douchebag this weekend, likely. So be willing to be adventurous. If you're introverted, maybe step out of your comfort zone a little bit. If you're extroverted, you're in the butter zone, baby. You're going to have a great time. So that'd be some of my really quick advice, is just be friendly. Don't be a douchebag.
On the topic of introversion, one of the biggest comments that I hear as a showrunner, and I feel deep down, is that for a lot of people, if you go to a convention year after year, convention is home to a lot of people. It is one of the places where introverts become extroverts. I am one of those people, because you feel so comfortable in that space that it becomes a place where you can be yourself. It is a place where you don't have to hide that nerdy thing that you're into because it's too embarrassing to talk about with people, or people aren't going to care. Everybody cares. You're all there to have a good time together. A lot of people bring a lot of drama into conventions. So if you can just leave your drama at home, that would be swell. But it's so easy to make friends at conventions. People are so easy to talk to at conventions because you know that you have at least one thing in common with every single person in the building. It's so much fun. So yeah, it's go out there, make friends, have a good time. Not to use this phrase, but let your freak flag fly. Because
It's
you're not a
true.
freak anymore. You're not that weirdo. You're among your people. And like, God bless everyone who calls a con their home, because that really makes it worth it for the showrunners like me who work very, very hard all year round. We're tearing our hair out to make this thing take place. And then when people tell us how much it means to us, then that makes it all worth it. So check out your local convention and then tell them that if you like it, tell them they're doing a good job.
All right. Well, it sounds like this is something we could go on for many hours. We are actually out of time, so that seems like a good place to start to wrap things up. So thank you as always for tuning in to Nerd of the Third Power. We will see you guys next week for Fools Who Ride, and in 2 weeks for our review of The Witcher. So thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I'm Dr. Gonzo.
I'm the cat.
I'm Skyblaze.
What a weirdo.
I'm Mike.
All right. We'll see you guys next time. Taka, play us out.